The legend of the Ninth Legion, known as the Legio Nona Hispania, remains one of the most chilling and enduring enigmas in the history of the Roman Empire, and for a USA audience fascinated by cold cases and military disappearances, this story represents the ultimate historical mystery. It begins in the early 2nd century, when the Roman world was at the height of its power under Emperor Hadrian, stretching from the sun-drenched sands of Egypt to the mist-shrouded forests of northern Britain. Yet even this invincible superpower possessed a dark frontier that would eventually swallow 5,000 battle-hardened soldiers without a trace. The Ninth Legion was no ordinary unit, for it was a prestigious and decorated force that had fought beside Julius Caesar, conquered Spain, and stood as the vanguard of the Roman invasion of Britain, making its sudden removal from the records of history a silence that screams across the millennia. Imagine 5,000 men, a massive sea of bronze and steel, marching north toward the Scottish Highlands where the savage Caledonian tribes waited in the shadows. And as the last eagle standard disappeared into the fog, it was as if they stepped off the edge of the world. There are no burial mounds, no records of a catastrophic defeat, and no survivors to tell the tale, which has led generations of historians to wonder if they were wiped out in a secret massacre or if they simply deserted and integrated into the barbarian tribes they were meant to conquer. This mystery resonates so deeply today because it challenges our belief in the permanence of power, showing that even the most disciplined military machine in the world can be erased by the shifting sands of time and the unforgiving terrain of a hostile land. In the grand libraries of Rome, the rolls of the legions were meticulously kept, yet after the year 120 AD, the name of the Ninth Legion simply vanishes from the military lists, replaced by a haunting void that would later force Hadrian to build a massive wall across the neck of Britain to keep the darkness out. Some believe the legion was sent to the east to fight the Parthians or the Jews during the Bar Kokhba revolt, but no archaeological evidence has ever surfaced to confirm their presence in those distant deserts, leaving the damp and deadly forests of the north as their most likely final resting place. The psychological impact of losing an entire legion was so profound that Rome may have intentionally suppressed the news to prevent a panic across the empire, much like a modern government might classify a military disaster to maintain national morale. The story of the Lost Legion has inspired countless movies and novels, from The Eagle of the Ninth to modern Hollywood epics, because it taps into a primal human fear of being forgotten, of vanishing into a wilderness where nobody can hear you scream. As we peel back the layers of this ancient cold case, we find a story of pride, survival, and a terrifying struggle against an unseen enemy that moved like a ghost through the Caledonian pines, striking from the shadows before melting back into the mist. The Roman soldiers of the Ninth were professionals, men who had spent their lives perfecting the art of war, yet they were ill-prepared for a landscape where the maps ended and the spirits of the wild held absolute dominion. Their disappearance marks the exact moment when the Roman expansion slowed down, as the empire realized that there were some places so rugged and some people so fierce that even the might of the Caesars could not tame them. Today, we look at the ruins of Roman forts in York and Scotland, searching for a single coin, a rusted helmet, or a scratched message in a stone that might finally tell us what happened to those 5,000 lost souls. The silence of the Ninth Legion is a reminder that history is not just a record of what we know, but a vast ocean of what we have forgotten, and in the deep waters of that ocean, the Roman eagle still waits to be found. This part of the saga sets the stage for a journey into the heart of Roman military culture and the brutal reality of life on the edge of the known world, where the line between civilization and savagery was as thin as a blade. As we move forward into the next chapter, we will explore the specific events leading up to their final march and the political climate of an empire that was beginning to feel the first tremors of its eventual decline. The mystery of the vanished legion is not just about a missing army, but about the fragile nature of human glory and the enduring power of the unknown. To understand why the Ninth Legion was driven into the heart of the Caledonian wilderness, we must first look at the volatile political climate of the northern frontier, where the Roman occupation was never truly stable and the native tribes viewed the eagle standards not as symbols of order but as the shadows of a predatory monster. The year was 117 AD, and the accession of Emperor Hadrian brought a shift in Roman philosophy from aggressive expansion to defensive fortification, yet the Ninth Legion, stationed at Eboracum, which we now know as York, found itself caught in a spiral of escalating violence that demanded a decisive response. The tribes of the north, specifically the Brigantes and the Caledonians, had begun to coordinate their raids with a newfound sophistication, striking at Roman supply lines and vanishing into the impenetrable bogs and dense forests before the heavy infantry could retaliate. Brandon's deep narration would emphasize that these were not mere skirmishes but a systematic attempt to bleed the Roman war machine dry through 1,000 small cuts, forcing the legion's commander to make a fatal choice between staying behind his fortifications or marching out to crush the rebellion in its cradle. Tension in the barracks must have been palpable as the veterans of the Ninth, men who had seen service in the deserts and the Rhine, looked toward the dark, misty hills of the north with a sense of foreboding that history has since validated. The decision to march north was likely born of a desperate need to restore Roman prestige, for the empire could not allow a band of barbarians to defy the power of Rome without a crushing consequence. As the 5,000 soldiers prepared their gear, sharpening their gladii and tightening the straps of their larica segmentata, the air in York was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the rhythmic thud of marching boots, a sound that would soon be replaced by the haunting silence of the moorlands. They carried with them enough supplies for a prolonged campaign, but they were marching into a geography that the Romans had never fully mapped, a land where the weather itself was a weapon and the terrain favored the guerrilla tactics of the lightly armed tribesmen. The strategic goal was to find the enemy's main gathering point and force a pitched battle where Roman discipline would inevitably prevail, but the Caledonians were too clever to face the legion in the open, instead drawing them deeper and deeper into the highlands like a predator luring its prey into a trap. Each mile they marched away from the safety of the south, the cord of civilization grew thinner, and the psychological pressure of being watched by unseen eyes from the ridgelines began to erode the morale of even the most hardened centurions. There are whispers in the ancient texts of a great uprising that set the north of Britain on fire, a conflict so severe that it required the presence of the emperor himself to stabilize the province. Yet in the official reports sent back to the Senate, the specific fate of the Ninth is conspicuously absent. This suggests a disaster so absolute that it was deemed a state secret, a tactical failure that would have emboldened other provinces to revolt if the truth were ever made public. As the legion crossed the line where the hills turned into mountains, they left behind the world of law and entered a world of ancient gods and blood oaths, where the only rule was survival and the only certainty was the cold. The mystery of their disappearance is heightened by the fact that no Roman commander would have led his men into a situation where a total massacre was possible unless he was completely blind to the enemy's strength or betrayed from within. Some historians speculate that the Ninth was lured into a narrow valley, a natural kill zone where the tribes could rain down rocks and spears from the heights, neutralizing the Roman shield wall and turning the professional army into a frantic mass of trapped men. In this second part of our journey, we see the legion at its peak of readiness, unaware that they are marching toward a black hole in history that will swallow their names, their families, and their very existence, leaving us only with the cold wind blowing across the Scottish moors as a witness to their end. As the 9th Legion ventured further into the mist-choked heart of the Scottish Highlands, the very air seemed to thicken with a sense of impending doom, as the professional Roman soldiers, accustomed to the sun-drenched plains of Europe, found themselves lost in a labyrinth of dark glens and ancient forests where the sun rarely touched the ground. Brandon's voice would lower to a gravelly whisper to describe the terrifying atmosphere of the Caledonian wilderness, a place where the trees themselves seemed to lean in like silent executioners, and the rhythmic clanking of Roman armor was the only sound in a world that had suddenly gone quiet. By the third day of their march into the deep interior, the Legion was likely suffering from the psychological effects of sensory deprivation and constant ambush, as the Caledonian tribes, masters of the landscape, used the dense fog as a physical shroud to strike at the stragglers and vanish before a single Roman sword could be drawn in retaliation. The legionary scouts, who usually provided a screen of protection, were being found pinned to trees with wooden stakes, their eyes removed to symbolize the blindness of the Roman Empire in this savage land, sending a clear message that the Legion was no longer the hunter but the hunted. In this claustrophobic environment, the famous Roman maniple system, which relied on open space and clear lines of sight, became a liability as the heavy infantry was forced into long, thin columns that stretched for miles along narrow, muddy tracks, making them vulnerable to a coordinated strike from the ridgelines above. History suggests that a sudden, massive storm may have broken over the mountains, turning the narrow paths into rivers of sludge and neutralizing the Roman advantage of heavy equipment, as soldiers struggled to keep their footing while being pelted by a relentless rain of stones and javelins. This was the moment the traps snapped shut, as thousands of tattooed warriors, their skin painted blue with woad and their hair matted with lime, emerged from the mist like ghosts of the forest, screaming war cries that shattered the remaining resolve of the tired legionaries. The fighting would have been a chaotic, bloody nightmare of close-quarters combat where the Roman gladius was too short and the space too cramped for the shield wall to hold, turning the proud 9th Legion into a fragmented mass of men fighting for their lives in the mud. There are no archaeological remains of this battle because the Caledonians were known to strip the dead of every scrap of metal, melting down the bronze armor and iron swords to forge their own weapons, effectively erasing the physical evidence of the Roman presence from the face of the earth. As the eagle standard of the 9th, the Sacred Heart of the Legion, was surrounded by a wall of barbarian spears, the last survivors likely retreated into the deepest parts of the woods, hoping to find a way back to the south, but they were instead swallowed by the bogs and the shifting mists, never to be seen by Roman eyes again. This total disappearance created a vacuum of information that allowed the legend to grow, as the Roman high command back in London waited for messengers who would never arrive, eventually realizing that an entire army had simply ceased to exist in the silence of the north. The loss of the 9th was not just a military defeat but a spiritual wound to the empire, proving that there were frontiers that even the gods of Rome could not conquer, and that the wilderness had its own ancient, bloody laws that no civilization could ever fully tame. When the news of the 9th Legion's silence finally reached the Roman headquarters in Londinium and the imperial palaces in Rome, it did not arrive as a sudden explosion of information but as a cold, creeping realization that 5,000 of the empire's finest soldiers had effectively walked into a void, creating a political crisis that Emperor Hadrian had to manage with ruthless efficiency to prevent the total collapse of Roman authority in Britain. Brandon's narration would take on a shadowy, conspiratorial tone here, describing how the Roman state, a master of propaganda and information control, likely began a systematic process of erasing the ninth from official memory to avoid the humiliation of admitting that a barbarian rabble had annihilated a decorated legion. In the ancient world, the loss of an eagle standard was a stain on the national honor that could trigger a collapse in military morale across other frontiers, so the disappearance of the ninth was treated not as a tragedy to be mourned but as a secret to be buried, leading to the suspicious lack of records that has fueled the mystery for 2,000 years. Archaeological evidence shows that shortly after the legion vanished, Hadrian himself visited Britain, bringing with him a fresh legion, the 6th Victrix, to replace the empty barracks at York, yet the official chronicles of his visit focus on his grand architectural projects rather than the missing men. The most tangible reaction to the disaster was the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a massive 73-mile stone barrier that served as a physical admission of defeat, a line drawn in the earth to say that everything north of the wall was now a land of ghosts and monsters where Roman law no longer applied. This wall was not just a defense against raids. It was a psychological shield for an empire that had been shaken to its core by the realization that its power had limits and that the northern mist could swallow an entire army without leaving a single bone behind. Within the military bureaucracy, the name Legio Nona Hispania was quietly struck from the rolls, and soldiers who might have survived or been stationed elsewhere were likely reassigned to obscure units in distant provinces like Judea or Arabia to ensure the story of the massacre never coalesced into a coherent narrative. The USA audience, familiar with the concept of government cover-ups and classified military failures, will recognize the pattern of a superpower trying to save face by rewriting its own history through omission. As decades passed, the ninth became a campfire story, a ghost legion whispered about by young recruits huddled around the watchfires of the wall, wondering if the strange lights in the northern bogs were the spirits of their fallen brothers still searching for the road back to Rome. The intentional silence of the Roman Senate on the matter was so effective that it took modern archaeology to even realize a legion was missing, proving that the empire was just as skilled at destroying information as it was at building monuments. This cover-up transformed a military defeat into an eternal mystery, ensuring that the Ninth Legion would never have a proper funeral but would instead live on as a haunting question mark in the annals of time. As we look at the empty pedestals where their statues once stood, we see the true power of an empire to delete its failures, leaving us to piece together the truth from the fragments of stone and the echoes of a silence that was forced upon history by the will of a Caesar. The modern hunt for the vanished Ninth Legion has turned into one of the greatest archaeological cold cases in human history, as scientists and historians armed with ground-penetrating radar and DNA sequencing attempt to pierce the 2,000-year-old silence that surrounds the Scottish Highlands. Brandon's voice would transition here into a more analytical yet still mysterious tone, describing how for centuries the prevailing theory was a total massacre in the north, but the discovery of several tile stamps and inscriptions in the Netherlands bearing the mark of the ninth has thrown the historical world into a frenzy of debate. These fragments of clay suggest that perhaps the legion was not entirely wiped out in Britain but was instead withdrawn in disgrace and sent to the Rhine frontier to guard the borders of Germania, though many experts argue that these artifacts could simply be the work of a small detachment or a logistical unit rather than the entire 5,000-man force. In the United States, where forensic science and investigative documentaries are immensely popular, the search for the ninth is often compared to the hunt for a lost battalion, with researchers trekking through the treacherous terrain of the Scottish bogs searching for the eagle of the ninth, a bronze standard that would be the ultimate proof of their fate. Some groundbreaking theories now suggest that the legion may have suffered a series of devastating defeats that reduced its numbers so significantly that it was no longer a viable fighting force, leading the Roman High Command to consolidate the survivors into other units and delete the Ninth's name to erase the shame of its decline. Another startling possibility has emerged from recent excavations in the Middle East, where some scholars believe the Ninth was actually transferred to the brutal Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, where they were allegedly ambushed and annihilated by Jewish rebels in the narrow canyons of the desert, a theory that would explain why they vanished from Britain only to reappear and then disappear forever in a different corner of the empire. However, the lack of a definitive, smoking gun, like a mass grave or a recorded surrender, keeps the mystery alive, as every new discovery seems to contradict the last, leaving the Ninth Legion as a ghost that haunts multiple continents at once. This scientific tug-of-war highlights the fragility of historical truth and how easily an entire army can be misplaced by the passage of time, especially when the original record keepers had every reason to hide the facts. As we use satellite imagery to scan the ancient forests of Caledonia for the outlines of lost marching camps, we are reminded that the earth holds its secrets tightly, and the mud of the Scottish moors may yet contain the rusted armor and shattered bones of the men who marched north and never returned. The modern obsession with the Ninth is not just about archaeology. It is about the human need to close the loop on a story that has been left open for 2 millennia, a quest to give a name and a face to the 5,000 souls who were lost to time. Whether they fell to a barbarian axe in a rain-soaked glen or perished in the scorching heat of a desert ambush, the Ninth Legion remains the ultimate symbol of the unknown, a military unit that transitioned from a fact of war into a phantom of the imagination. The enduring legacy of the Ninth Legion has transcended the dusty pages of history books to become a powerhouse of modern mythology, capturing the imagination of a USA audience that thrives on tales of lost soldiers and unsolved mysteries. Brandon's voice would now reach a cinematic crescendo, explaining how the Vanished Legion has inspired a subgenre of literature and film, most notably Rosemary Sutcliffe's The Eagle of the Ninth, which perfectly encapsulates the romantic yet tragic notion of a son searching for his father's lost honor in the mist of Caledonia. This narrative of the lost eagle standard has become a metaphor for the American experience of military loss and the deep-seated cultural need to bring every soldier home, regardless of how many centuries have passed. The idea that 5,000 men could simply dissolve into the fog of history challenges our modern world of constant surveillance and GPS tracking, offering a haunting reminder that there are still places on this earth where the unknown holds absolute power. As we reflect on the potential fate of these men, whether they were integrated into the fierce tribes of the North or died defending a forgotten outpost, we realize that the Ninth Legion has achieved a form of immortality that no other Roman unit can claim. Their names are gone, their bones are dust, and their armor is rust, but their story remains as vibrant and terrifying as the day they first marched past the gates of York. The silence that Rome forced upon their disappearance has backfired, for instead of being forgotten, the Ninth has become the most famous legion in the world precisely because we don't know what happened to them. They represent the thin line between civilization and the wild, a reminder that even the greatest empires are built on fragile foundations and that nature always waits for the moment when the walls begin to crumble. In the cold, gray light of the Scottish Highlands, when the mist rolls over the moors and the wind howls through the ancient pines, it is easy to imagine that the Ninth is still out there, a phantom army marching through a timeless wilderness, forever seeking the road back to a home that no longer exists. This part of the mystery serves as a bridge between the ancient past and our modern quest for meaning, showing that even in failure, there is a legendary beauty that survives the passage of time. The Ninth Legion did not just vanish. They stepped into the realm of the eternal, becoming a story that will be told as long as humans gaze into the darkness of the unknown. The final chapter of the Ninth Legion saga brings us to a chilling realization that connects the ancient world to our modern reality, serving as a profound philosophical mirror for a USA audience that understands the weight of a superpower's responsibility and the heavy price of its failures. Brandon's voice would conclude with a deep, resonating authority, describing how the mystery of the Ninth has evolved from a mere historical footnote into a haunting warning about the limits of human ego and the inevitable decay of even the most powerful structures. We must ask ourselves if the Legion's disappearance was not just a military event but a symbolic transition, representing the exact moment the Roman Empire realized it could no longer dominate the world through sheer force alone, forcing a retreat behind walls of stone and silence that signaled the beginning of the end. This seventh part explores the ultimate question of whether the survivors of the Ninth, if there were any, chose to stay in the wild, finding a freedom among the barbarian tribes that the rigid, tax-heavy Roman state could never provide, effectively choosing to vanish rather than return to a life of cold discipline. It is a story that echoes through time, reminding every generation that no matter how advanced our technology or how vast our armies, the primal forces of nature and the human spirit's desire for independence will always remain unpredictable variables. As we stand today at the edge of the ruins of Hadrian's Wall, looking out into the same mist that swallowed 5,000 men, we are not just looking at a graveyard of soldiers but at the birthplace of a legend that refuses to die because it represents the ultimate human fear of being erased. The silence of the Ninth Legion is their greatest victory, for in vanishing, they escaped the mundane fate of other units that were simply disbanded or forgotten, instead becoming a permanent fixture of our collective consciousness, a ghost army that will march forever in the shadows of our curiosity. This conclusion leaves the audience with a lingering sense of wonder, asking them to consider what they would do if they were the last centurions standing at the edge of the world, watching the eagles fall and the fog close in. The story of the vanished legion ends here, but the mystery remains a living, breathing part of the landscape, a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is only waiting for someone to find the courage to step into the mist and look for the truth. The eagle of the Ninth may be lost to time, but the legend of the vanished 5,000 lives on in every shadow of the Highlands. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's greatest mysteries, hit the like button and subscribe to Battle Memoirs. Tell us in the comments, what do you believe happened in the mist? Until next time, keep searching for the truth.